Hi, I'm Kathleen Bade. Another discussion for you with a superintendent from across the country. This time we're headed to South Carolina. We have Dr. W. Burke Royster from Greenville County School District. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Well, tell us about your school community.
Well, our school community, a little bit unique. Most school districts in our country are either rural, or they're urban, or they're suburban, or they're two of the three. We happen to have all three of those populations in our community. We're a county-wide school system. We cover over 800 square miles. Got about 78,000 students in our district. We're the 44th largest in the country. Pretty diverse population in our area, and we're seeing a lot of growth. There's an awful lot of growth in our part of South Carolina. People moving there from all over the country.
And how are you addressing that?
Well, it's an important part of what we have to do every year. We have a long-range facility plan to make certain that we have the facilities available as the growth occurs. We update that every year, and so we're constantly building. We have 7 significant additions underway right now in our district. We have a new elementary school under construction. We just completed and occupied a new high school. So that sort of growth will drive what we need to do for the next several years. We're fortunate too in that the growth is fairly evenly distributed throughout our county. And that makes it a little easier to address.
I understand that you've been behind some of this development of the infrastructure, that you've been key in that. Why is that a priority for you?
Well, the first is we've got to have a place to house students. But we want to make sure that they're in the kind of facilities that meet the needs for 21st century education. It's also a working condition, obviously, for our teachers. And in a day and a time when teacher recruitment and retention is challenging, we want to make sure that we're offering competitive pay. We want to make sure that our teachers are teaching in up-to-date facilities, that they have the most recent technology available to them. So it's not just a matter of meeting growth, it's important to have the facilities that will allow us to deliver the services our students need to receive.
What do you think is the number one priority when it comes to infrastructure then that you're talking about?
Our number one priority is making certain that we keep up with growth and that we like to refer to it as just-in-time construction. We don't want to build before we need it, because then we're placing a burden on taxpayers before it needs to be there. And we certainly don't want to be chasing growth. We don't want to have students in large numbers of portables. In fact, in our district right now, with the 78,000 students we've got and 100 plus facilities, we have fewer than 30 portables in use county. They're not as desirable. Now, we certainly try to make them attractive. And
I went to school in one in Arizona when it was under rapid growth.
A lot of people have that experience, and sometimes that's just what you have to do. But it's also more of a security and safety concern today than it was a number of years ago. All of our facilities are constructed in such a way that students don't have to leave the main building to go anywhere else in the building. When you put portables in place, there's no way you can maintain that level of security. So we have to do additional fencing. It's not as easy to provide the same level of security there as you can when everything's under one roof. Though we're still doing that, it's just an added challenge and it's an added expense.
As your time as the superintendent, are there certain initiatives or programs that you're particularly proud of?
I think the thing that we most often reflect upon and we take the greatest pride in and believe that we've had the most significant attainment with, we began several years ago with the concept of graduation plus. So shorthand, we refer to it as G+. It fits kind of nicely. We're Greenville schools. Our symbol's a G, so G+. And that simply means that we want you to graduate, but when you walk across the stage as a Greenville County Schools graduate from one of our 15 high schools, we want you to have either college credit or a recognized industry certification on your transcript. So really, our students have shown evidence that they can do college work or that they're ready to go directly into the workforce. It's not something, there are all these standardized tests that people give all over the country, SAT and ACT. People use that as a predictor of college success. Well, for us, we believe this is proof of college success. It's not a score on a test that says you might do well. I think probably all of us had the experience that we know people that predicted they'd do pretty well when they went to college and maybe didn't do quite so well after they got there. They got distracted by other things sometimes.
Few things.
But this is proof. You can show a college admissions office that you've got college credit already. And we do it through two means, through dual credit. So you're taking an actual course, just like English 101 or English 102 at the college level. You're getting college credit, you're getting high school credit for it. Or you're taking advanced placement courses. The difference in the two is an advanced placement. They're offered all over the country in a variety of subjects. You have to take an exam at the end of the course. If you make a 3 or higher on that exam, you get college credit. If you enroll in a regular dual credit course, whether or not you get college credit is based on the work you've done all semester or all year long, just like a regular college course. Now, our students are required to have a C or better. College, you can get away with a D or better, as long as you don't make too many of them. But they're required to have a C or better to get the dual credit. And our students last year earned, I think, about 28,000 hours of credit through one or the other of those methods, and they earned over 11,000 industry certifications. So that's everything from interior firefighting to EMT, welding, machine tool, mechatronics, which is a foundation for a lot of jobs, particularly in our area in advanced manufacturing. It's also the basis for a lot of jobs like HVAC work, control work, that kind of thing. So we really think that's a significant step in us preparing our students for the next step by actually having taken the first step towards the next step.
And that must be confidence building for them as well. Do you see that in the students because they actually have a certification or college credits in hand?
Yeah, and the other side of the certification, what you see in the students when you go out and get the opportunity to observe them in class or at work, they're enjoying it. That hands-on engagement. A lot of students, you'll see that same thing inside a classroom. But for some students, inside the classroom, that's not as exciting or as engaging. When they're out there actually applying what they've learned in the classroom, then you can really see that that's making a difference in their engagement and their enthusiasm.
And I would imagine that fits in with technology because most of the time the students know more than we do when it comes to that. How are you navigating the rapidly changing technology and the entrance of artificial intelligence?
That's a big challenge for anybody in education, whether it's K-12 or post-secondary. That is, though, also one of the areas where we're experiencing great interest in certifications for technology, particularly in cybersecurity area. We have some cybersecurity programs, but specifically AI has been a challenge in preparing our faculties for how it can be effectively used but appropriately managed. Because it certainly is a tool that both teachers can use and students can use, and used the right way, it's beneficial. But now if you're just using it to do your work for you, obviously not going to help you in the long run, and that's very difficult for teachers to, on one hand, see that it's not really that person's work. Now the other side of that is if they've been in that class for a little while, good teachers generally can look at somebody's work and say, that doesn't look exactly like what they usually do when they're in class. So part of that balance is there's got to be interaction in the classroom setting, not reliant on them producing a paper or a product where they're talking to you about what they know. To me, that's the greatest check and balance against the inappropriate use of artificial intelligence.
And sort of reinforces the concept we hear from a lot of superintendents, like artificial intelligence cannot replace a teacher.
No, we've got a virtual school program, so we have students that are learning through application through devices. Now there's a teacher on the other side, but it's not in person. So it doesn't matter whether it's that. Years ago, 50, 60 years ago, educational television, now it's kind of commonly referred to as PBS, but at one time, half of the beginning of that was to transmit lessons into classrooms in regular schools. But that didn't replace a teacher. There's nothing that can replace that human interaction and the knowledge that goes into good teaching and the ability to recognize in a student when they need extra help, when they need a little independence. And to actually, people that teach, I think, would all say this, you can almost tell by looking at them when they understand what you're teaching them, just because of how they react and interact with you.
You mentioned the virtual classrooms or lessons that can be provided now, all of that, kind of the silver lining that came out of COVID. Talk about the pandemic relief funds, what you use them for, and how you're planning for them expiring.
Well, we tried to structure our use of those by simply taking methodologies that we knew worked. Specifically, there was a loss of instruction. There wasn't a loss of learning. People talk about a loss of learning. They didn't lose it. They missed out on instruction. So their knowledge that they did not acquire that they should have acquired. We simply took the methods that we use to move students that are performing below standard that we found to be effective, primarily using math and reading interventionists to tutor those students in small group settings. And we just added a significant number of those people using ESSER funding. Now, we didn't add any more than we knew that we could absorb in a routine year of hiring. So that worked out pretty well for us. We will hire on any given year between 500 and 700 teachers. So we looked at that very carefully because you hear people talk about a funding cliff. We didn't want to create a funding cliff. We wanted to bring people in that would move students forward, try to regain those things they had missed, but have an end to that. And we're almost back now. If you look at our standardized test scores, that's the measure of returning to pre-pandemic. Almost all of our schools are back pre-pandemic scores or higher. So the need is tapered off. The funding obviously ends in 24, and we'll absorb those people into other teaching jobs in the district. So that's not been the challenge for us that it's, I think, been in a few other places.
When you look at 2024, what are your major objectives?
Our major objective is to continue to ensure that we're moving forward with having students attain that G+ that I referenced to you. Our last year's graduating class, 75% of them had it. So we want that to be 100% of the graduates. 3 years ago, it was 52%. So we're making significant progress, but we need to continue to focus on that and to make progress. And we talk about that as college credit and industry certification. Those are obviously the measures at the end in the 12th grade. But every place in our system, there are implications in pre-K, in elementary, middle school, and in high school to make sure our students are prepared academically, knowledgeable about various careers, what kind of skills you might need to have for those careers, and how you may be able to be flexible and move between those careers. So it's like building anything else. You have to set a solid foundation and continue to build on it to reach that outcome in the 12th grade. So while we talk about the measures are at the end of the system, that's a systemic wide effort. And so we need to make certain that we keep our focus on that's everybody in our system knows that's the end game and that's the end product. But it requires a lot of effort in a lot of different ways to make sure we have students prepared to do well and to take advantage of those opportunities.
And you've been in this position for more than 10 years now.
I'll be starting my 13th year as superintendent in April.
How has the job changed over the course of that time?
It is the same in that there's constantly change. So that part's the same. But we've been through some unique circumstances, been through a pandemic. We've been through the the political fracture that's occurred in our country in the last several years. And sometimes we get in the center of some of those factions and their disputes. So that's different. Not generally being in years past, with a few exceptions, perhaps as highly politicized. But there's always been challenges. There always will be challenges. We have a challenge with recruiting and retaining teachers. That's a nationwide challenge. Our turnover last year was about 10%. That's really pretty good current standard. In our district, in 1970, the turnover was 30%. So some of the things that people think are unique challenges, they're not unique. They've happened before. But every generation has its own kind of fresh challenge, and oftentimes a repeat of some previous challenge.
History always repeats itself, right?
Yeah, it does, because unfortunately we maybe don't often do a good job of learning from it the first time.
Well, tell me about your leadership philosophy as a superintendent.
You know, it's pretty basic, I think, and I'm sure you hear this from a lot of superintendents, that we need to be focused on making decisions of what's best for our students. But the other thing is to be focused. So if you go to our district, what I would hope you would see, if you ask anybody, it didn't matter whether they're driving a bus or they're working in maintenance or they're teaching in a classroom or they're working at the district office, it shouldn't matter. They should know we're trying to produce graduates that have college credit and industry certification. Because one of the things where I believe organizations go astray is when there is not a clear, focused, measurable outcome, and it's, in one sense, it's minimal. We're not trying to focus on 1,000 things. Now, we might have to do 1,000 things to be focused on that one. But when people don't know the single common direction, that's when people go off in all kind of different directions, and it doesn't allow your organization to do what it needs to do to serve your students.
So it sounds like communication is key.
It is, having a clear vision, of trying to effectively communicate that, and continuing to communicate it. This is not a one-year program. This isn't, no, we're going to do this year, next year we're going to do this other thing. Unfortunately, a lot of times in education, like other businesses, professions, there's a tendency to, well, come into a conference like this is great, and you learn a lot. Sometimes people make this mistake of, they heard 5 things and they go back and put those in place without regard to where they are in their organization. That may not be what you need. That may not be a fit for where you are. And I think it's important to understand your organization, what will fit there with the focus that you have, and not just jump on something because it sounds like it's a good idea, or because it worked for somebody else. What worked for them may not work for you.
What are some of the opportunities you foresee in public education right now?
Well, I think the greatest opportunity is to frame the future as far as producing students that hopefully will be able to think for themselves, be able to take all this information, which there's so much more of it than there was. Well, there's no more of it. You can just get to it. I mean, everybody's got a smartphone or some kind of phone. You can pull that up, and there is no information that you can't get on it. Now, how accurate is that information? Well, some of it's highly accurate, and some of it wouldn't even hit 0% on accuracy. How do you discern? So, helping students to be able to think through things. What are the questions you need to ask? Some of those skills we've been teaching for years. They're basically research skills. What do you need to ask about? What's the citation for all this information you've got? Is that a reliable source? Do you go back and look? And AP teachers, they'll talk quite often about source documents. Do you go back to those things? Do you discuss this with others? Do you listen to what others are saying? How can we help students to build the skill set of being able to work with other people? To be able to, one of the great, I think, shortcomings right now in our society is people cannot disagree without it becoming personal. And a lot of times people use the phrase, they can't disagree without being disagreeable. Well, that's a valuable skill to learn how to do, to actually listen to what the other person's saying, make your points, but still be able to get along with that individual after you've had that exchange where you don't agree on whatever it might be. And that's essential to our society functioning, I think.
How do you implement that into your curriculum?
I think a lot of that comes through how you approach teaching in the classroom, how you, going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier about engaging students. And you have to start that, at a low level and with students working together, being respectful of each other. And then as they get older, they move into high school, then debating, in some cases, controversial topics, but arguing either side of it. One of the most powerful things you can see in a high school that exemplifies that, if you ever go to a debate team match, and you may have done that or been a part of that, well, you get assigned what side. You don't get to pick what side you're on. You get assigned a side, and it may not be the side that you agree with. And somebody else gets the other side, and you actually debate that issue. And you may turn around in the next round and you're given the opposite side of the argument, and you have to effectively argue that. It teaches those kinds of reasoning skills, the ability to understand the viewpoints of both sides. It may or may not change your opinion. I think a lot of times it might cause people to modify their opinion a little bit. But things like that, one of the greatest opportunities for students, particularly as they get older at the middle school and the high school level, are to engage in activities like that, whether it's athletics, ROTC, debate, band, chorus, where they learn how to work with other people as a part of a bigger team, as a part of pursuing a common goal, whatever those goals might be, different for each one of those examples that I gave you. That really builds a tremendous set. Industry likes to talk about soft skills. That's the kind of thing that helps to build soft skills. Teachers can also build that in their classrooms with how they have students interact inside those classrooms, how they debate issues, and how they present material in class.
And the irony is those soft skills can be hard to learn, can't they?
Yeah, they're very challenging because it's hard to sit there and listen to somebody who, I don't agree with any of that. But you just need to listen all the way through. Because most people, they're listening to say what they're going to say instead of just listening to what that person's trying to communicate.
Well, in this current educational climate, what is your best advice for other superintendents?
I think to stay focused. When you working with your community, when you decide what the goals are, and the community has buy-in to that, then staying focused on those things, and every day recognizing that, the reason we're there is for students to get the skills and the knowledge they need to have to be successful in a world, quite honestly, that we'll never see. And if you think about that, and you think back 30 years ago, and I think back 30 years ago, I'm not sure I could have imagined that today would look like today. So it'd be hard to try to imagine what it's going to look like for our students that are in kindergarten right now, 30 years from now or 40 years from now. What's that world going to look like? So we've got to try to prepare them with skills that will make them be able to assimilate all those changes that we can't even understand or see.
Is that a common discussion among superintendents?
Yeah, I think in various
or educators
formats, yeah. That that obviously education, it's always been challenging, but that's kind of the immediate challenge is to prepare people for this rapidly changing world. But if you think back, our world has rapidly changed in the last 100 years. The generation before mine, my parents' generation, their parents didn't have automobiles. So, they went from that to, while my parents were still living, they saw a person walk on the moon. So, tremendous change over the years, but now just so rapid and such an ability to garner all this information, some good, some bad, some indifferent.
What is your overall outlook of public education right now?
I think it's a critical time for public education, and it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're telling our story and not let the narrative be driven by people that, quite honestly, a lot of times don't know what they're talking about. People see things on social media and they believe that's happening. And many of those things aren't happening, or they happen 12 states away in some isolated incident. So that's a challenge for people to understand and know exactly what's going on. And that's part of that difficulty as our population is aged. Depending on where you are in this country, you may only have about 25 to 35% of your community directly engaged with the school, i.e. they've got children in school. So how do the majority of the community, how do they get their knowledge about what goes on in school? Talk to most parents, they will talk very positively about their local school. In fact, there's a poll on education that's been done for years and years, the Gallup poll. Phi Delta Kappa, I think, originally sponsored it. So it's consistent. I mean, this is like maybe 50 years worth of polling. And every year in that poll, people will highly rate the school their child attends. They won't as highly rate other schools. Well, I would argue you'd know the most about the one your child attends, not somebody else. So even people with that connection, they're generally pleased with where their child is in their school, but they maybe think those things are not going on, the positive things aren't going on in other schools.
Well, I appreciate all your food for thought and also the positive things you shared with us going on in Greenville County. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.